to mention that today's conversation does cover some fairly sensitive topics. And so, for those who um, you might need to protect yourselves, right, my loves? And so, we want to include a trigger warning for this. And so, if you need to, be mindful, look at the description in the show notes. And if you feel that this may be a little much for where you are in your journey, then don't listen to this episode and perhaps you could circle back to it later. So we just wanted to say that for you all. Hi, everyone. Today we're diving into how to navigate your darkest moments and emerge from grief, trauma, and pain into a future filled with hope, resilience, and joy. Dr. Samantha Blake Harte is a physical therapist, choreographer, speaker, podcast host, author, and retreat leader, and she is dedicated to helping others find their way through life's toughest challenges. In her book, Breaking the Circuit: How to Rewire Your Mind for Hope, Resilience, and Joy in the Face of Trauma, Dr. Hart shares her deeply personal journey, including her mother's mental illness and her own struggles with betrayal, loss, and addiction, and offers a transformative blueprint for overcoming adversity and reclaiming joy. I know this is an episode I'm really excited to share, so let's do it.
Welcome, everyone. We are here with Dr. Samantha Hart. So excited for this conversation. I would love to ask you, really, where did you begin
Mm.
in all of this? Go back to the back to the back, because I know your story is so layered, so deep, and so inspiring. So, do you want to start from the beginning?
Sure. You know, I- it's always interesting because I've been asked that question a lot, and then I don't have a predetermined script. So, what's literally coming up for me right now in this moment when you ask me that is one of my earliest core memories, which will be a great springboard into what my childhood was like, which is Sam at 4 asking her mom why she had to take those pills every night. What I was seeing was a mom who presented one way during the day, which was very emotionally unstable and volatile, and then at night would take these pills that would seemingly anesthetize her emotionally. And there would be this vacancy across her eyes. And it frightened me because it was so different from the mom I knew during the day. And so I finally confronted her and asked her. And she said to me, "Do you like the things that you have?" And I'm 4. So I'm
Yeah.
like, yes. I don't know what's about to happen. Yes. Well, if you like the things that you have, then I need to make money to get them for you. In order for me to make money, I have to work. And in order for me to work, I have to sleep. These pills help me sleep. And that was the end of the conversation. And I think back to that time and I think, what did I learn in that moment? Many, many things, right? The most formative and arguably the most dangerous, and I'm not blaming my mom, by the way, okay? But this is me looking back in hindsight about what I understand about how I coped in the world. I learned that if there is a part of me that is begging to speak up, which is, I now know, my most intuitive self, my most authentic self, my true essence, I had better not. I had better not. Because if I do, I threaten my proximity to my caregivers, and that's dangerous, right? So, that was the presentation at home was unbeknownst to me, but of a mentally unstable mom who much later in my life had acute bouts of bipolar disorder that ended up with her in a psych ward multiple times, and that's a huge part of my story that I actually often don't talk a lot about, but we can. And so I was the emotional mediator. She was very unhappily married to my dad. My dad, by the time I remember much of anything at all, was in the basement. So they were staying together for the kids,
Mm.
miserable. And my dad was just absent. He would hang out with us and take us places, but he didn't talk to me. He didn't have a lot of depth and weight. He certainly didn't do his own inner housekeeping. And so everything my mother said was God. That was gospel. That was the way that the world worked. That was why things were the way they were, including things like there's no such thing as God, and the only person you can count on is yourself. And then I had a big sister who was very awkwardly going through puberty and not particularly attractive at that time, acting out sexually, acting out with drugs. My mom was cheating on my dad and telling me about it. So I feel like at a young age, I was just confused about being myself and totally overexposed to sex, drugs, cheating. And there was this self-righteous indignation on my mother's part of, fuck your father. I get to do whatever I want to do now because of how much I've suffered. And it's really fascinating because, I'm 16 years sober today, and there are still subconsciously parts of me that are tethered to my mother's story that I carry. And they're very insidious that I've lately been excavating, like, haven't I suffered enough? Can't I just spend this money? Can't I just not do the work for a little while? And some of that was learned, and I continue to have to unlearn it. So I think one of the biggest coping mechanisms I had growing up was perfectionism. I was a hardwired type A to begin with, but then in that environment, I doubled down on that because I was so unbelievably rewarded for how good I was, how pretty I was, how fit I was, how smart I was. Oh my goodness. And so I felt so often like I was split between two worlds, and that would follow me well into my addiction because then I was really splitting. It was the work hard, play hard motto of I'm going to get all the straight A's and I'm going to look so good on the outside, and then I'm going to douse myself with poison because of this unrelenting inner critic and anxiety that I'm living with. But before the addiction took off, I was still very much split in a similar way. I just didn't have the coping mechanism of drugs and alcohol yet. And so what I mean by that is, I would show up in junior high school and high school and act like I was strong and confident and fine, but I wasn't. I wasn't okay. I was confused about what was happening in my house. I was so unbelievably hard on myself, and I had no way to diffuse that energy. And so it was this unbelievable cycle of, oh, more anxious? Well, you'll be okay once you get the A. So now go back to studying and study even harder. And it was just lather, rinse, repeat. And of course, I was never okay. And another thing I remember about my childhood is I used to say to my mom all the time, I'll be so happy when. I'll be so happy when the test is over. I'll be so happy when the gymnastics competition is done. And she would just look at me and say, why can't you just be happy now? Which was very ironic because she didn't know how to be happy now. Mm. And she missed entirely the root of my suffering, right? The very fact that I couldn't be happy in uncertainty, that I couldn't tolerate the possibility of failure was the place she needed to meet me. But she hadn't met herself there, so she couldn't. And that's how I functioned. And, if you catapult this part of my story into the early years of college, here I am getting a degree in something I don't really care about because what I really wanted to do was sing and dance. But my mom was like, that's not a surefire way to a stable life. And so whatever mom said was what I need. Even though my dad kind of supported my dream, he's like, do whatever you want. I got you. I couldn't get behind it because he didn't connect with me in my formative ways enough for me to trust that. I trusted my mom more. And so I'm getting this degree that means nothing to me, but I'm going to show everybody how I'm not going to gain the freshman to 15 and I'm not going to flunk out of my first semester, right? So I'm skinnier than ever and I get straight A's and I'm winning prestigious awards at Boston University. And then I have this professor that will not give me anything other than a C. And a C was like the death sentence. Literally, you might as well have just ended my life. And I'm like, there's no way. There's no fucking way. And nothing I did helped. And I got really desperate, didn't know how to ask for help, didn't know how to accept or tolerate something other than an A. Don't remember really talking to anybody about it. And I plagiarized. I had never plagiarized in my life. And he caught me. He had the paper that I copied from stapled to the back of my paper with a big zero and a see me after class. And he said, gosh, I wish I could remember his name too, because the irony of all of this and that I wrote a book, um, it would just be so wild, to reconnect with him now and actually have a grown conversation about who I was then. Because he said to me, I was wondering why this paper was so much better than all of your other work. And then I realized it's because you copied someone else. And I'm going to report you to the academic committee, and they're going to decide what to do with you. The level of shame that I felt, and for years afterward, by the way, is hard to capture in words. But imagine, right? Your whole identity is tied to these external achievements, particularly academia, and it's just collapsing. And I end up getting a pretty severe punishment. I got an 18-month suspension. And the idea of going back was unimaginable because my friends would be second semester seniors on their way out of college, and I would be a first semester junior. And I was like, no. And that's where I rewrote the story and I said, this was supposed to happen. Told you, mom, I'm not meant to do this communications degree thing. I'm a star. And so now I'm going to do what I want to do. And the thing is, I had finally time away from her, those 2 years away, to kind of clear my head and go, what the hell just happened in my house all those years? And why did my mom tell me the things she told me? And where the fuck was my dad? And so here I am, 19, full of shame and full of anger. And before I can move out and figure out what I'm doing with my life, I moved back home with my mother. And that was a terrible year. We fought so much. And what I had done prior to this time in my life with drugs and alcohol was kind of just dabble. I certainly experimented, but not in any other way that a lot of kids in high school do. But man, it was off to the races at this point. And it made a lot of sense, right? Because if I already had that unrelenting anxiety, now I had this horrific traumatic incident, forget it. Like, give me the fastest route to escape from the way I feel. And so, what does a young girl who wants to be a star do? She moves to Manhattan and becomes a bartender so she can audition during the day and then make her money at night, right? So, as I'm trying to pursue fame, which for sure, if I had had any real success, would have killed me, there's no question. I was ramping up the level of using to the point where cocaine just became a part of my drinking story. Once it was exposed to me, it was everywhere. And then I could drink more when I did more cocaine. And so it was always hard to gauge, how much of anything was even in my system at any time because of the way those two substances interact. And this is a great moment to capture the level at which high functioning, and I really put that in quotes because spiritually there's nothing high about the way we're functioning. Okay. We're dead on the inside, but externally we look like we're high functioning. But this was the level, right? So of course I didn't fully try to be a star. I also kind of went back to school because I didn't want to be a girl, didn't finish her undergrad degree, finished at Fordham, and then I just kept hearing my mom's word, get your degree, get your degree. No one can take it from you. And the more volatile the entertainment industry, the less I was able to tolerate it. And I was like, what's a degree I could get that's really prestigious, really sexy, that I could see myself inside of also? And a person I ended up roommating with in the many roommates I had in New York City in my early 20s was getting her doctorate in physical therapy. And I just remember there would be years between her telling me that and me deciding to do that as a career. But it was like a seed was planted. That is the greatest safety net of all time. That is like I can do that for a living. I can start my own business. It's about the body, it's about movement. I'm a dancer. That makes sense. It makes sense. My mom would be so proud. And sure enough, that's what I did. I ended up settling into I'm bartending, I'm drinking and doing a lot of cocaine, but I can put it down, study really hard to take all the science classes I need to take to get the A to help me get into this graduate program for PT. And I'm teaching dance in a couple of really prestigious places around New York City. Like I was like, I got it. I got it figured out. This is good. And then on the evening that I got accepted into my doctoral program, I overdosed on cocaine. And by the way, you guys, like this isn't even my story. Like this is some of my story, but it is so not even where it gets good. And you would think, that would be some kind of rock bottom. It totally wasn't. It was a very scary moment where I did, in fact, call the one person I knew who was sober. And he took me to a meeting. So I was frightened that I was losing control of that, just that. And I sat in the back of those rooms and was like, no, not even a little bit is this for me. Right. And again, it's dangerous when the world outside of you is telling you how fucking great you are because it's so hard to identify, let alone the language of the steps, especially contingent on your level of faith or not and what you've been exposed to about the idea of God. Those steps either feel like the safest thing you've had in your whole life or they feel wildly unsafe. And for me, not that I knew this at the time, because I was being told I was just a self-centered addict who's stuck in her ego and pride, but really I felt radically unsafe in that container. I felt safer holding on to perfectionism and just trying not to drink and use than I did inside of the 12-step framework. So I went on for another year and a half, cutting and pasting how I drank and used. And by the way, you guys, I'd been dating a guy for this huge chunk of my active addiction. And so while it was all fun in the beginning and wild and crazy in our early 20s, it soon became not fun because he's like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was like, well, that sucks because I do. And I would just go on tears. I would cheat. I would lie. I would sneak out. I mean, and he just stayed and stayed and stayed. And he shouldn't have, but he did. So then he catches me with this prescription pill bottle that my father, whose role in the family dynamic was very much enabler. So when my mom's doctor would cut her off with a prescription, my dad would get it in his name for her. And then as my sister and I got older, if we wanted Xanax, Ambien, Valium, we would just kind of, hey, dad, can we please? And then he would just drive it into the city for me. And my boyfriend at the time caught me with this pill bottle and was like, you're still fucking doing this shit? He was so fed up. And I was like, he's gonna leave me. He's gonna leave me. And then I'll be nothing and no one. So I called that same guy again and I was like, maybe I need to go back to one of those meetings. Like I don't know what my options are. He's like, come on, kid. Same thing. Sat in the back, was like, ugh, but I felt like out of options. Like this is the danger of trying to change on a cellular level when it's not coming from you. The fact that I haven't relapsed is an absolute miracle of my story because it would take me 5 more years before I hit actual spiritual rock bottom, where I had the gift of desperation and the willingness to go, I will do anything to feel better because I don't want to die, but I can't go on living this way. Took me 5 more years from this part of my story, right? And there are so many people who die before they get there. I'm just one of the lucky ones that didn't. So I'm gonna like pause here because you guys probably have a ton of questions. That's like a huge initial part of my life and my story.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about this idea of rock bottom. It's so different for everyone.
Mm.
And I resonated with a lot of parts of your story. I didn't have all of the same things happen to me, but like the perfectionism and my drug of choice was food addiction. And so, I know you talk about all sorts of different types of addiction in your work.
Mm.
And this idea of rock bottom, I remember listening to a podcast episode with Oprah and Gabby Bernstein. And Gabby Bernstein was talking about how she had this rock bottom moment with cocaine, I believe. And she was, talking about how that was finally the catalyst for her to make changes in her life. And I remember so clearly thinking, I was in grad school at this time, I believe. I remember thinking like, does it have to get that bad for me to be able to finally change this? So
Mm.
I'm curious what your thoughts are
Mm.
on, do we need a rock bottom? What does the rock bottom look like? If you want to just, yeah, speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, this is tough, right? But when I look at my track record, it's very, very often things have become fairly dire before I make a real change and I'm ready for change. Does that mean that is the absolute truth and that is what's required? I'm not sure. I do think pain is a circuit breaker.
Mm.
The level of pain is up for question. And when I say circuit breaker, what I mean is we operate in unconscious patterns, many of which we learned when we were young, right? And they work. They work until they don't. And when they stop working, usually there is a pain point. And this could be, by the way, this is where the work of the physical body and the spiritual body really start to overlap. Movement pattern issues are the same. All of us, if we have the gift of getting older, are going to find out eventually that some of the movement patterns we've been in for 20, 30, 40, 50 years have been wearing out certain parts of our body, low back, knees, to the point where it's going to cross an invisible line and create a pain signal up to the brain. And we're going to be zapped into a state of consciousness around it. And we're either going to do something about it or we're not. And so when I say pain is a circuit breaker, I mean it wakes us up from a sleeping state. And all of a sudden, this feedback loop that has been so reinforced is arrested momentarily. And there's this window of opportunity to create new neural circuits. And the question is, what are you going to do when you get there? And so, does the pain have to be severe? Does it have to be face down in a pit of despair? Do you have to be homeless on the street with a needle in your arm? No. You do need a level of awakening, though, so that you can split yourself from the automatic behavior and start to see it and really start to ask yourself the hard questions of how is that behavior that I didn't know was even there before playing out in the landscape of my life today? And is it affecting my personal relationships, my business, my romance, my family? Is it affecting it such that I'm heading in a direction where I get to the end of my life and I feel like I left something on the table? Like there was more to be done there and I didn't do it. And can that be enough for you to go, I'm willing to elevate my consciousness now, right here in this moment of awareness, get whatever new tools I need, hire the therapist, the coach, the like dive into my personal development so much that I'm going to reroute the trajectory of where this is going. So I don't know if that answers your question. What I can say is the gift of time in recovery is that my threshold for discomfort is much lower now. So, the extreme
Mm.
example of I get into my DPT program and I overdose, it doesn't look like that at all anymore. There are periods of my recovery where it's still become extreme. I mean, I lost my dad when I was 10 years sober, and for over a year went into a raging eating disorder in recovery. Did I relapse with an 8 ball of cocaine? No. But that was a pretty extreme behavior for me to try and outrun my grief and not feel the feelings around the regret of that relationship and how complicated it was, and that I didn't feel like I could resolve it before he left this earth in physical form. But I I had a moment of clarity, and without the time sober and the self-examination I had been in practice doing, maybe that moment of clarity would have taken me 3, 4, 5 more years, right? Maybe I would have relapsed and died if it weren't for the level of self-awareness and not wanting to suffer so much anymore and not really being convinced that I have to. And I would say to you guys that, 16 years in, I'm in a place where I've been as brave as I've ever been in my life around grief, which I do believe is one of the hardest things that we as humans navigate on an emotional, spiritual level. And I have started to learn how unbelievably beneficial it is to lean straight into the pain. So it's a really complicated question. And I think it takes unbelievable amounts of courage for the person who is in whatever level of pain to stay there and to really ask themselves, am I willing to face this? And to what extent? And then it takes a really good coach or partnership. It's very hard to see the picture from inside the frame. And so if you had, like, I had somebody at my rock bottom who then presented to me a new way to do the 12 steps. And she said, what if we do them on your marriage? And I was like, what do you mean? But also, yes, because I was in this marital crisis and it sounded like something that could truly help me. And so, in that window of opportunity, whatever the rock bottom version is, whether it's a 2 out of 10 pain or a 10 out of 10 pain, there had better be a new set of tools. And you had better be willing to double down on practicing them if you want to change
Mm.
your life. But it's totally possible.
It's like unplugging from the paradigm that you're currently in and plugging into a new one that you've been presented with.
Yep.
Yeah, I love.
And
I like that. I
yeah,
like that imagery a lot.
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the level of, repetition and practice, right, that is required on a brain level to make real change is not for the faint of heart. Because even when people describe in recovery, for example, like having these moments of clarity, right? Like when I had it with when my dad died, it still took unbelievable amounts of consciousness, abstinence of dangerous behavior, and practicing of new behavior for me to actually start to heal, right? So once you plug it in, there's no guarantee like it's going to stay charged,
Yeah,
right? And that's
yeah.
so important, right? Because I think in the land of self-help, sometimes it's feels a little bit like a spiritual bypass. And I really want to make sure when I talk about, at least for me, what has been required to change my entire life, it takes fucking work.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people think that it's like, oh, I just need to. I hear a lot of times in the wellness world, in the personal development world, where people are like, oh, it takes that one decision. And I'm like, no, it does not.
Yeah. Hundreds of thousands of small decisions. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
You were
totally.
talking about this when you were little you, 4-year self, and I think about the fracture that took place, this denial of self
Mhm.
and this plugging in of perhaps your mother as she was that primary person for you at the time. And fracture is something that we have an opportunity in our fields to explore better. We talk about the fight, the flight, the freeze, the flop, and the fawn. And fracture, I feel like you have beautifully in your story kind of described what this can look like, where again, unplugging of the self. And then now you are at this circuit breaker experience, and
Mm.
it's this pattern interrupt that's big enough to cut that circuit to perhaps even create a new fracture of, okay, we got to unplug from this. So, what comes next then? So,
Mhm.
feeling the feelings, leaning straight into the pain. For those who are in that right now,
Mhm.
what do you have to say?
Yeah. When I met this woman after 2 years of sleeping on people's couches in this marital crisis, because the guy that I cheated on that I dated was then my fiance and then my husband, and now he was pulling away completely. And I was totally coming undone. Right. So finally, this part of me that was so sure she could control, manage, and manipulate the world around her was collapsing. And there was so much evidence of the insanity of the way I was living by nature of literally being homeless and sleeping on couches until finally someone said, you got to get a lease and get a place that's your own. I go to a meeting and I see this woman speak at the podium, and she shared about killing somebody in her using in a car accident, but she seemed joyful. And I was like, I don't know what this woman is talking about or how, but I should probably ask her to sponsor me because I don't know what else to do. And she was the one that said, let's do the steps on your marriage. And where everything broke open and this extremely protective part of me got to finally stand down for a moment was in the ninth step process. I'm 5 years sober. How many amends have I made in 5 years? A lot. Outward amends to other people, especially to my husband. And here I am in this marital crisis, and the voice inside my head that was the loudest kept saying, despite the part of me that was like, this doesn't add up. This does not make sense. It is, I think he might be cheating on you. That voice was completely overridden, like my mom's voice, in my house when I was little, by a voice that said, this is what you fucking get for what you did. So we get to the ninth step. I'm dreading it. I'm like, I'm so sick of having to say I'm sorry to this man. And she was like, no, no, no. I want to know if you've ever made an amends to yourself.
Mm.
And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Uh, Foreign, radical idea. And I was 30 with a doctorate, and no one had ever, no therapist, no sponsor, my mother, nobody. And so, number one, I didn't even know I was allowed to do that. Let's just start there. That I think there are women operating, and I'm not saying there aren't men either, but I'm just speaking to what I know about being a woman and how many times we fucking apologize. I don't even, there are women who don't even know they're allowed to forgive themselves. So number one, this woman then granted me permission to consider that notion. And so now I'm going, wait a minute. If what she's saying is true, that I'm actually not a bad person, even though it really feels like all of this is happening because of what a piece of shit I am. If if I'm not a bad person, but I might have made 1,000 bad choices, and I'm a good person who deserves love and forgiveness and a deeply fulfilling marriage, then that means because that's a new identity. That means that I can't keep speaking to myself this way. And if that's what that means, then that means I have to pay attention to how often I am speaking to myself that way. So in the days and weeks and months that I was living in this unfurnished apartment, every time my critical voice showed up, I was like, hey girl, it's you again. I know why you're here. I know you're trying to protect me, and you've done such a good job for so long, but right now you are killing me. You are hurting my spirit, and I can't see my way forward when I listen to what you say. And so I need to try and think of something else to say that's more aligned with where I'd like to go. And then I had to imagine what that was, which meant that finally I was clearing away the shame that was on top of that true essence that got silenced and fractured when I was 4. And I waited to hear what she had to say. And she would suggest something like, wow, this is really hard. It's extremely painful, very scary. You don't know the state of your marriage. It feels very much like it's your fault. But instead of it being your fault, maybe it's just the ramifications of a really complicated story between you and him, and we don't know the outcome, and that's okay. But we do know that we're worthy of love and forgiveness. And so like at any given moment of the day, and I just did that on the fly with you guys right now, right? Like I had to think about, this is the other thing about these positive affirmations that we read on the internet. Like it's got to land, it's got to be resonant in your nervous system in a way that feels safe. And this is the thing about the way we did the steps. I felt safe. I felt safe enough to clear the shame, safe enough to wait for the whisper of my intuition, which then became my lifeline, which is the most important relationship that I rebuilt and that I continue to build every day of my life ever since. It has been the guidepost for all of the happiness and all of the healing that I've done from that day forward. And so this process of taking the 12-step framework that is beautiful in its essence and nature, but antiquated and not particularly current with what we know now about addiction and childhood trauma and psychology, is the life raft. It's the kind of the bridge back to yourself. And it's the way I've used the step work on every hard thing that's happened ever since. And it's ultimately what my book became about. Because we talk about in the 12-step rooms, like, oh my God, everybody could use these steps. This isn't just for addicts, it's for, and that's true. It is true. And also, there are a lot of people inside of that container that stay very, very sick like I did. The relapse rate is extremely high. Are we getting to the root of people's suffering? Are we helping them heal their shame? Or are we exacerbating it by accident? And so, I'm going to piss a lot of people off, and that's okay with me, because really what I'm doing when I talk about these things is I'm just sharing what saved my life. Literally, I don't know if it's going to save yours, but I can certainly speak to what saved mine.
So what's next? You have a story of hope. What does that look like?
Yeah. For a long time in my recovery, I was running a private practice. I became the PT. I started a cash-based practice. I treated whole body, whole person. It was amazing. But I also felt like spiritually, I was watching these patients suffer from soul sickness. They were also addicted to things that weren't substance, like people pleasing, codependency, perfectionism, the beauty and body standard. And it bothered me so much, because whether it was secondary, meaning they paid me all this money, they have knee pain, I gave them this protocol, and they come in and say, well, I didn't do it because, I had to do X, Y, and Z because my husband never does it, and on it goes, right? So that their actual sort of addiction to people pleasing and having to be that person got in the way of them doing the program, so they aren't getting better, or the inflammatory process from this chronic stress is literally getting in the way of their healing. It bothered me, but who was I? I'm not a psychologist. I'm a PT to point that out to them. I mean, I did what I could, right? They came to me for an hour. I spent a lot of time with my patients because I was cash-based. I built deep relationships, but it felt like an itch I couldn't scratch. And then 3 years ago, I lost my sister Jessica to a drug overdose. And it had been the thing I was dreading for my whole life. And I was like, that's it. I have to do something about the spiritual side of health and wellness. So that was the call, the cry really, to write this book that I wrote. And today, the greatest thing I offer people is this coaching container that tackles both the body and the spirit together. All this stuff I did over a decade of my practice, rewiring the nervous system to get people out of those old movement patterns that were creating inflammation and structural wear and tear. I now couple that with the 12-step framework that's a more modern and trauma-informed approach. And you don't have to be a substance abuser to get freedom from it. I've had people come to me and work with me who are in marriages that they feel absolutely trapped in. And without changing the marital situation, they have freedom and liberation inside of it just by having a new perspective. And so the hope and the healing is that this framework, if I extracted the two most important things that I teach people, and it doesn't matter if it's about their body or their spirit. And when I say spirit, I mean anything spiritual coming up in their friendships, romance, families, business. If we have a way every 24 hours to stay inside of compassionate curiosity about what's coming up, either between us or within us, and we can take radical responsibility for who we are today and who we'd like to become, there is always hope. And that is truly like the front end of the step work for me is the compassionate curiosity, which was missing in those first 5 years, right? So instead of I snap at my kid, I have a 6.5-year-old and a 10-year-old. Happens a lot. I snap. Instead of the default voice going, why the fuck did you just do that? And immediately feeling guilty and ashamed. How many moms can relate to that? I shift it to, why did I just do that? What just happened? The tone is so different. And all of a sudden, instead of, well, you're just a fucking piece of shit mother, you're just failing at life. And it's this black and white rigid thing that I can't heal from and I can't transcend. It's this looseness that I stay curious around. I go, oh, like, oh my God, that moment triggered me so much and made me feel like I'm trying to be such a mindful mother and they're not showing gratitude. And like that means I'm failing. And now I'm not actually breaking the generational curse of my lineage, which is like my whole thing. And so it threatened my identity. And so I got so, oh. Or maybe it's as simple as, oh my God, I haven't eaten in 8 hours. I didn't get a good night's sleep. I'm irritable. And okay, great. So now I see it through this compassionate and curious lens. What am I going to do about it? Where's the radical responsibility? Okay, I'm gonna not beat myself up because I know that that is a dead end road, but I'm gonna apologize. First of all, I'm gonna get down, look at my kid in the eye and say, Mommy just got so irritated and impatient, and what just happened just made me have really big feelings. I'm sorry that it came out in a way that didn't feel good. I'm going to try really hard next time to take a deep breath to think it through before I say something, and then really do that. Like really create a consciousness around amending the behavior, amending the thing that just happened by way of understanding why it happened and keeping the antenna of awareness up. And so, why do we get to the end of our lives with regret? Like, we didn't say the thing we wanted to say. We didn't drop the guard around our heart and love more fully. We didn't forgive. And so, what is this framework helping us do? It's helping us do all of that. It's helping us constantly forgive ourselves, forgive others, and be accountable for our actions, our words, our thoughts, our behaviors, our identity, who we're trying to become. And so if you're living that way, I think the chance of hitting your head on the pillow every 24 hours, and then you stack enough of those days together, getting to the end of your life, lends itself toward being really fucking proud of who you were. And I don't know a person who doesn't want that.
Mm, that's brilliant. I wrote down, I have a lot of notes here. Some things that are sticking out to me that you were describing is feeling the feelings, leaning straight into the pain, and doing that with compassionate curiosity of what is that? Where's that coming from? And it gives that radical acceptance that we are so worthy of, and we could reparent that to ourselves. And then I love that also the radical responsibility, because it's one thing to have that aha, to have that compassion, to have that awareness, and then you're taking it a step further to say, well, what am I going to do about it? And I love that because action is programming. Action takes things out of concept and puts it into practice. And I love that you're modeling that. I was just in an interview the other day with somebody, and he's like, well, how do you do that with your kids? How do you model real
Mm,
feelings to your kids, model your imperfection to your kids? And I feel like you just displayed that, just demonstrated that so beautifully of, I had this experience, I'm sorry, and here's what I'm going to do about it. Because nobody's perfect. We don't want our kids to try to fall into that perfectionism trap. And so showing them the sides of you from that really authentic place, I think that's really brilliant.
Yeah,
thank you.
and I love how you also talked about how there's like all of these affirmations and all of the things, and
Yeah.
a lot of times they're not effective, right? Like when we just tell ourselves like kind of self-aggrandizing things about ourselves that we don't actually believe, they're not effective. And so it's more about not assigning morality to what just happened, kind of neutralizing it rather than being like, no, it was good that I did that, or like I'm this amazing person, whatever. It's like, can we just neutralize it? Can we just be like, oh, interesting. What just led to that? I think that that is a huge thing for our listeners to take away from today as well.
I love
Yeah.
that. So,
Yeah.
how can people find you? I'm sure people are eager to get your book, to find your Instagram. Tell us the best ways they can get involved.
I'm definitely on social media the most active on Instagram, which is Dr. Samantha Hart, DR, and then it's Harte. And if you DM me, it's me who's responding. It is not a bot or somebody on my team. You will hear from me. And the same is true for my website. It's drsamanthahart.com. And on all the different pages, you can learn about, I do a lot. I have a lot of different ways that you can experience me, from the lowest level and free to obviously the one-on-one experience. But you can, on any of the pages of my website, book a free 30-minute discovery call if you just want to connect, which a lot of people do after they hear me on a podcast. And I absolutely love that. So please don't
Yeah.
be afraid.
Yeah. You have the Calendly embed or the scheduler you use right there. It's super easy. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. I will include all of the links in the show notes, and everybody make sure that right now you go and give her a follow on Insta, share the love. If this conversation was valuable for you, or if you have somebody in mind, please share it. And as always, if this podcast is on your love list, we would be so grateful if you would give us a little bit of words of encouragement in the form of a review. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.